Good afternoon, everybody. Let me welcome all of you to this Project Advisory Committee meeting of our project on good and better jobs in India, the phase 2 of the project. Was led by my ex-colleague and friend, not ex-friend, of course, Abhishek Kumar, and I think he has done an excellent, he and other colleagues, they have done an excellent job in that respect, and he is kind enough to be associated with the agenda. Uh, we have also joined by Mr. Nitin Desai, who I think doesn't need any introduction, one of the finest thought leaders in our country on economic issues and also on environment issues, particularly their governance aspects, among other things, of course. Then Mr. Vijay Upadhyay is a trade union leader, long time associate of Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh, now heading the Dattopant Thingari Foundation, which is a think tank set up by the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh. Perhaps I don't know exactly, but most like the largest trade union in the country.
Of course, our largest in the world. Yeah.
Oh, pardon my ignorance. uh, we have also been joined by a number of colleagues, Sanchita Chatterjee, Yatika Agarwal, Palashka Jha, and Keval Sharma. While Keval is one of our IT guys, others are taking lead and implementing this particular work. So in this meeting today, there are 3 agenda items. First is that we have just completed a study under this project, which has looked at how Indian corporates are looking at workers' welfare as part of their business development strategy. So that study is completed, and my colleague Sanchita, she is going to make a brief presentation on major findings, recommendations, and most importantly, what I request you to guide us on how those recommendations can be taken forward. Second agenda item is to discuss the terms of reference, particularly the methodology of doing a sequel of that study, another study, which is going to look at how our investors or institutional investors, whether investment banks or venture capitalists or whatever, how they are looking at workers' welfare as in respect to their investment decisions. In that context, how effective the existing ESG tools which are emerging, how effective they are. So my colleague Palashka, she is going to make a brief presentation on that study, which we are going to do. The third agenda item is, of course, any other issue that or issues that you may like to raise in this meeting to take forward the overall objective of the project, which is to understand, research, and take forward to advocacy the conditions which are necessary to be in place, which effectively means institutions which have to be in place for good and better jobs in India. So with that, let me first request Sanchita to make a brief presentation on the first study. Sanchita, over to you, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you. Let me just open it. I'm going to turn off the video if it's okay, because there's a thunderstorm going on, and I'm not sure how good the connectivity will be. So I'll turn off the video and and I'll share the screen. Sorry, just turning it on.
I think Mr. Desai's connection is lost again.
Yeah, but I believe that he will be joining soon.
Should I wait for him to join back?
Actually, he
I'll come
joined
back.
since-
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, okay, all right.
I was
Okay.
I was in a closed room where probably the signal was causing problems. So I just shifted outside.
Okay, okay, all right. I have turned off the video because I'm worried the connectivity is not that great, but I'm sharing the screen. I hope all of you can see it. So, you know, the study is actually a synthesis report, synthesizing findings, survey findings of 4 sectors. And we have given it a title, Workers' Welfare and Corporate Strategy, a case study of India. Of course, the background is that while GDP growth in India has been high, unemployment has also been high. And even these numbers don't tell us the whole story. There are a lot of other stories behind this. So the methodology adopted was literature review and primary survey. Through this primary survey, we got 43 respondents from 4 sectors and different geographies. More or less, the sectors, the 4 sectors, hospitality, gig economy, construction, textile, were equally represented among the respondents. And the aim was to capture a comprehensive picture as well as conventional as well as emerging employment scenarios. So going to the findings, so findings are grouped according to theme, and then the recommendation followed the finding. So the first one is about status of contractual workers. So we found that mostly this category of workers undergo less formalized hiring methods. They have high attrition rates, and they have different HR practices than that of on-roll employees. And they also have skills gap. So our suggestion, and this suggestion came from our survey feedback, is to create a national portal which will connect employers, employees, skills demand, and supply. So basically bridging skills demand and supply, and also job opportunities. Employers can advertise job opportunities, and job seekers, of course, can log in and take advantage of these advertisements. Why are we suggesting this? We think this will help to centralize recruitment and help both employers and employees, because right now it's very fragmented, and contractual workers are actually suffering because of the fragmentation. One idea is that eShram, which is an existing portal by Ministry of Labor and Employment, that the contractual workers can already register in eShram. This can be further developed to incorporate the other elements which have been mentioned above. Then workers' perspective. Overall, it appears contractual or unskilled workers are dissatisfied with the working conditions. So mostly when we are talking about contractual workers in this study, we are talking about unskilled or semi-skilled workers. They're dissatisfied with working conditions. Companies are also concerned about attrition rates among this category, as well as disciplinary issues. So our suggestion is that a comprehensive worker survey is conducted to provide policy inputs to both central and state governments. Why are we suggesting this? Because this will complement the current study and can be taken up as a natural step after the conclusion of the current project. Trainings for contractual workers. There are few companies who do train contractual workers or blue-collar workers or unskilled, semi-skilled workers, but mostly they receive much less training than, say, skilled or on-roll employees. And often the conditions of the training is not ideal in the sense that, you know, a lot of them are wage earners, and for them to leave even a day's employment to take training somewhere is not an ideal situation. So we suggest that different formats and methods are taken to train this category. Also, you know, we can consider about providing them stipends. We can think of organizing trainings on sites, say, for example, construction sites. This is, you know, this is an issue that was felt across the board. All the companies, almost all the companies have talked about training, and we think that there should be a joint effort of governments, National Skill Development Council, sector skill councils, industry associations, companies, civil society organizations. So it has to be a joint effort given the scale of the issue. Government as an enabler. So companies doesn't really, you know, disparate picture when it comes to welfare of all categories of worker, but more for, you know, unskilled workers. And so we think, you know, government should, of course, you know, be, of course, ensure that employers follow recommended rules and norms, but also, you know, create labor markets which employers find it easy to maneuver. So, you know, government should be enablers. And, you know, there is, we feel, why we are suggesting this, we feel that there's definitely a need for more government intervention, and greater dialogue between government and different parties will help in creating an enabling framework. Impact of automation. Blue-collar jobs will be impacted as several jobs are forecasted to become redundant, and demands for new skills would go up, expected to go up. So there should be a national, that's our recommendation, a national strategy on workers' welfare that should look at some implementable steps and timelines also, you know, what companies should be doing, government should be doing, and should also deal with skilling and reskilling. Because, you know, automation and application of advanced technologies is expected to negatively impact this category of workers. And, you know, if the government carries out consultation with related parties, it will help to create such a strategy. Women's participation, particularly in blue-collar jobs in the sectors under study, is quite low for various reasons. So our suggestion is that measures should be adopted for boosting by tackling attitudes. So there are a lot of attitude things like women can't do this, women can do this, women don't like to work with men, you know, there are different employers have talked about different things. And also, you know, making provisions in workplaces as per women's needs as well as facilities and benefits. Why? Because, you know, it's already established that increased women's participation in workforce will be beneficial for the economy. So, you know, it should be, of course, again, led by relevant government departments. And there should be more dialogues between, you know, different parties, and certain framework should be set up to make sure that employers follow the minimum norms. Enhanced awareness of ESG. We found that most respondents didn't know about ESG. And almost all respondents have said that they don't apply, like maybe 1% have said that their company applies ESG. And even for CSR, a lot of them were not aware of CSR. What is CSR exactly? So the recommendation is that there should be more capacity building and increased awareness measures for ESG, but also CSR. To encourage greater uptake of these by companies, because particularly for ESG, This has been a useful vehicle all around the world for ensuring social justice is integrated in corporate strategy. So, we think encouraging ESG would be beneficial for workers' welfare. And various stakeholders can jointly organize customized trainings to companies, especially SMEs, on ESG. Incorporation of sustainability, while some respondents did talk about some sustainable development issues, but hasn't been incorporated in welfare measures for blue collar workers. So we recommend that sustainability parameters should be integrated in such measures, because this is really a neglected topic. Even when they're aware, they don't do anything to make sure workers' welfare is positively affected by sustainable measures, or there are sustainable measures to make sure workers' welfare is taken care of. And more awareness generation is needed in this. So both governments and corporate sectors have their roles to play. Taking these recommendations forward, so this is our point of view, CUTS team point of view. So first of all, spreading the message. We will communicate the findings and recommendations through briefing papers, notes, op-eds, articles, presentations in seminars and conferences. We will also seek to have dialogues with both central governments and state governments and discuss recommendations as appropriate. And in our future work, we will incorporate elements, appropriate elements, the correct elements, and develop our project concepts. Thank you. I would welcome comments, suggestions, and how we can take forward these recommendations.
Thank you, Sanchita. Before I request Mr. Desai and others to put forward their thoughts, particularly on how to take forward these recommendations, I know that this is not an exhaustive list. There may be more which you can think of as we get progress. I just want to make a couple of points. One is, would it be possible to take forward these recommendations, may not be all of them, with necessary changes, customization, into the periodic labor force survey? So that gives us, or any other such government survey, maybe non-government, private survey is done by many, particularly I'm talking about thinking of CMI, to see how A, their receptivity or acceptance, and B, to have a longitudinal understanding of issues, how they are moving over time. That's one. And the second thing is, I think what you need to understand, the first one could be an immediate agenda. Second is a bit long term. While it is true that in our country there are institutions dealing with workers' welfare, but there is a lot of scope for their further development. I'm not at all saying that they are bad or good or whatever. All I'm saying that there is scope for their development, further development. And by institutions, I don't mean organizations or bodies. Let me quote from Douglas North from his work on institutions, importance of institutions in the historical development process, on which he received Nobel Prize in Economics. His definition is that institutions are the rules of the game in a society, or more formally, are the humanly derived constraints that shape human interaction. Then he went on to emphasize the implications of institutions. In consequence, he said, in consequence, institutions structure incentives in human exchange, whether political, social, or economic. So I'm emphasizing on the word incentives and the phrase incentives in human exchange. So what kind of incentives that we can think of for all parties, Samaj, Sarkar and Bajar, to take steps to develop institutions which are rules or policies, practices, regulations to further develop for workers' welfare in our country and become an intrinsic part of our corporate development strategy. With that, let me first request Mr. Desai for his thoughts. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you. Well, first I must congratulate the team on putting this thing together. I have one question. You have about, your survey covered about 4 sectors. Am I right? That is tourism sector, the gig economy, textiles, and what was the 4th one?
Hospitality, gig economy, textiles, and construction.
Now, in many ways, it would be useful to see the difference between these 3 in terms of the issues that you have raised about contractual servants. I would not expect it to be the same in all 4. So it would be useful if that difference is explored. And because in many ways, the gig economy is one of which is one type of thing. A textile economy is something quite different. Hospitality is somewhere in between. So first I would argue that do have a look at that. The issue of the growth in contractual employment, some of this is there in PLFS in terms of numbers. And this is partly attributed to the conditions which govern non-contractual permanent employment which the companies provide. To what extent has this shaped? And I'm sure that would also be very different in amongst the sectors. And it would be worth looking at what is it. The third issue that I would want to raise is you correctly raised this issue of women's employment and the bottlenecks in that. And that I think is something which we should explore, because India has an exceptionally low rate of women's participation in the labor force, lower than Bangladesh, for instance. And so I'd say that this is something, a deeper exploration of this is well worthwhile. You have raised certain recommendations. One is a recommendation where you incorporate treatment of workers in SC. That's an interesting argument. We give a little side anecdote about this. There are ILO guidelines on workers' rights. Now, if you look at people who are supplying Walmart or something, they will not have those official human rights standards in their desk to look at. What they look at are the standards which are set by Walmart. Because if they don't meet the Walmart standard, they will really have great difficulty. So I would say that it is worth exploring the ESG side by incorporating more fully the standards about workers' rights, along with environment, social issues, governance issues. In fact, workers' rights is an important social issue and also a governance issue. So I would say that there is certainly worth exploring how this can be written into ESG. ESG is still pretty vague, and there is a lot of scope for introducing this more effectively into ESG. But let me stop here. I look forward to listening to what he has to say. I'll stop.
Thank you, sir. Sanchita, would you like to respond now, or would you like to hear from other members and then respond? together.
I think Mr. Upadhyay is waiting to talk.
Yeah,
I'd love to
it's
hear
okay.
him.
Let's wait.
Brijesh ji,
जी
let us hear your thoughts.
तो जो भी पीपीटी दिखाया है, आई थिंक बहुत अच्छे पॉइंट्स कवर किए. हिंदी जो कहना चाह जो पीपीटी व्हाट एवर रिसर्च यू हैव प्रेजेंटेड ना.
We are comfortable in any language.
अच्छा, ओके, गुड. तो most of the point actually what I wanted to express here today, the term worker today and the term worker in the past, there is huge gap between this. And I think Desai Sahab was also observing correctly. So I would request the initiative we are going to take, so we should cover all workers in supply chain, outsource, gig, platform, because other workers are already covered. Workers in the wage slab, workers in the organized sector, mostly they are covered with the social security and the rest of the obligations. The only workers concern is left out, those who are on contract, gig platform workers, job outsourced. So this is the only area of workers which is left out, needs to be addressed. And for this, when we discuss the human rights and workers' rights, the Desai Sahab was correctly observing. I think ILO has come out with all such details. Last week I was in such a same type of committee in UNICEF. There also we were discussing the same thing. So I told them that workers' rights are already classified. ILO has classified. Our labor ministry, in our labor course, it is classified. So we don't need to work out or list certain more. So first we need to address especially the rights classified by the ILO. And when we talk human rights, so human and worker, they are not two separate entities. At workplace, again I will go to back. Workers confined in a boundary wall of a factory, coming under a wage set, if they are the worker, so that worker definition we need to change. And if we go beyond this, so human and workers, human rights, workers' rights defined by the ILO should be area part of our consideration in this. The third important point in your paper you have mentioned, there should be ethics. So since day one, since my 42 years this experience of the labor field, legislations are there, everything is there, only ethics is missing. And because of that, the non-enforcement of labor laws, whatever it is, we are able to have a good books, good arrangements, good Angrezi, everything we have. But practicing it, implementation, that is totally missing. I was so happy to notice we are also going to look into the ethical aspects. So can we, when we are designing questionnaire, can we cover the ethical practices? Can we come out with some SOP on ethical practices? If we could, really it will be a great justice too. Otherwise, like other studies, it will be a study, it will come out with a good volume of books and find a place in the Almirah. Going down for implementation, for really connecting with the person for whom we are working, so that needs very different approach. That's what I wanted to add in this. Rest of your initiative and rest of the method, that the only thing, how to make it practical. Instead, this literary and academic approach, how to make it practical, applicable at ground, and really those who are needy, if they could get benefited with this exercise, it is going to be a great job. I think this only my observation I wanted to add.
Thank you, Brijesh ji. I will respond to some of your points, and the rest, Sanchita is going to respond. Let me now, I see that there is somebody from Paigam Network, I think. He has also joined. I don't remember, unfortunately. I'm
Hello,
sorry.
sir. This is Akriti Bhatia. I'm sorry,
Yes, yes.
we were logged in through the organizational Zoom. So
Yeah,
I
pretty.
just,
Welcome. Welcome.
thank you.
Let,
Thank you. I'm
let,
sorry for joining late.
let me now come to Neha first, and then I would request Abhishek for his thoughts. Neha, may I request for your thoughts? Neha, are you there? She is there. I don't know. Yes.
Hello, I heard my name being spoken.
Yes. Can we have your thoughts, Neha?
I can't hear you. Sorry.
Oh,
Can't hear you. Just hold on, please.
From these kinds of crises. So I do want to
Sorry. There's some.
an agenda for resilience.
I would request to carry on while I fix this at my end.
On what that means.
okay. In that case, I would request Abhishek to come first. Why, Abhishek, you have to unmute yourself.
Yes, Neha. Okay, great. Thank you, Bipul. Thank you, Vajesh, Mr. Desai. I have specific comments on all the 5 recommendations, or maybe 6 or 7 recommendations. So I'll just go them, reflect on them point by point. But before I start, I would like to basically pick on one important aspect of workers' welfare, which is what we had, and that's a question about wage. And I think that becomes an anchor, because when I remember when I was involved in the first phase of this project, the entire project was informed by the definition put out by Mr. Desai in his paper, work and welfare. And I would like to reiterate that definition. And I think that is the North Star when we're talking about workers' welfare. And the definition is that Mr. Desai notes that wages are the return that the laborer gets for the physical and mental capacities and the acquired skills that he or she offers for the production of goods and services of value to consumers. So I see 2 components here. The first is definitely the income component, and secondly, the acquired capabilities component. I think it is less spoken about the fact that what are the opportunities workers have on a factory floor and an ecosystem for acquiring skills and moving up. And I think that's a very central point of workers' welfare. We cannot have workers come in an assembly line production, move out without acquiring incremental skills. And I think that also feeds into a larger macroeconomic perspective when we're talking about solving and deploying different methodologies for tackling demand crisis. So that's my initial point. My subsequent points are that I am also, first of all, congratulations on very interesting research. It's a very tight research which comes up with very specific recommendations. The second is what is also apparent is that we're not talking about the issues of employment and raising employment. We are specifically focusing on worker welfare. But I heard a lot about what governments can do, very little about what private sector should do and must do. And I think this is an interesting issue because when we speak about issues like skill, etc., there is a lot of role for the private sector to discharge. So on that note, I'll just come specifically on some points that I had noted down with respect to the recommendation. The first is the creation of a national portal. So 2 things over here. There are, I think even before we get to a national portal, I would have a view that we must have a very decentralized exercise with state governments of understanding through data what is it that we need to do. I'll give you an example from Rajasthan alone. This is a pure simple convergence question. On one hand, we are talking about a Department of Labor operating under a secretary differently, and then there's a separate department which talks about enterprise, employment, and skill development. So the cognate areas are not working together. That's one issue. If you look at the data and what intelligence that we can gather from data, and I'm basing my arguments primarily on the fact that there's a lot of role for government that you have highlighted, then there is a need to sort of make data collation and analysis. Analysis is a part that is mostly missing, and this is where departments on cognate areas and departments of statistics, etc., must come together. The third issue, so I'll just leave it at that. The third issue is more broad issue. I mean, for example, on eShram, when the data collection happened, what we observed is that you have building and construction workers data which is easily available, so it's most of the numbers were provided from that, and other sectors were not adequately represented. So it's also important to see what are the acts and provisions at the state level and national level which today are there, but there is not adequate implementation, and hence there's no adequate data collection on that. For example, again in Rajasthan we have Domestic Workers Act, which exists, but because the implementation has not happened, a lot of information on domestic workers, their welfare is not contained in. And one can basically look at several other examples. So before we think of a national portal, I mean, national portal is important, but it needs to be tightly integrated with state level data portals, and they need to speak to each other. The second point is the strengthening trainings and skill formation. I will only reflect here mostly on the institutional aspect. Now, there are three institutional aspects that I want to reflect on. First is the reform of the sector skill councils themselves. And I'm moving from a premise that we're accepting that the skill missions or the skill development exercise would continue to happen in the same way that it does. So if that is the premise that we are moving starting from, then what are the reforms that we can carry forward? So first is that sector skill councils, they need to have better idea of market linkages. And again, I'll give you another example. I was just recently speaking to the sector skill council on solar, and I sent them 10 questions and what is the criteria on which you have done the demand assessment? And frankly, I have not received the reply. It's been 8 months chasing, because there is not any. Most of the demand assessment is actually happening by a lot of training partners, 400, 500 across sectors. So there is a need to reform that part. The second is the board constitution. And this is easier to do. You would see in the board constitutions of the skill development corporations, they're mostly government officers. There's hardly any private sector person that you would see. On the contrary, on NSDC, you do have a lot of private sector also represented. Third quick point, and I'll move very quickly on this, streamlining government's role in promoting workers' welfare. I've already reflected on it. The other thing is on the gig side, there is particularly on boosting women's participation. There is a lot of opportunity on putting another layer on top of existing institutional frameworks. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We were just recently interacting with an organization called Frontier Markets. And what they've done is they've used the SHG framework, put another layers of local demand and local supply, and those local approaches actually have far greater impact on workers' welfare, because it's a local ecosystem through which they are working. And what they're doing with that is they're adding gig economy layers, for example, e-commerce and other avenues where they're linking people to market using SHG network. And I think that's a very that's a very interesting example of building on an existing institutional layer. The last point, and I think that will also be a good segue. I mean, I have several points, but I'm just trying to stick to very clear, straightforward points, is where Neha could potentially come in, is one more point. Drafting national strategy on workers' welfare, automation, advanced technologies. I think what we learned also in the first phase and also in this project, on automation, what are the strategies and how to look at it and how should be done? Rather than looking at the sector in homogeneity, I think we need to understand it in heterogeneity, open up the value chains, and then understand that which value chain requires greater automation and which value chain would potentially be where more workers could be present. And again, come back to the example of textile. If weaving and spinning are being automated for greater efficiency, sure, and the labor cost there is about to 8 or 10%, but in garments it's about 30%, and the demand is dynamic. So my common sense tells me that it is far more intelligent to focus on the garmenting part, where costs are high, skill ladder is apparent, acquired capability formation is there, but little sense makes in trying to control automation on the yarn production and so on and so forth. So I'll leave it at that. And the last one is on the climate, and I think climate issues and climate imperatives are changing the way a lot of businesses work, MSMEs well as large businesses. You've already spoken about ESG, which may be a humongous cost to small enterprises. So I'll leave it at that. And I think Neha could potentially reflect better on the intersection of climate and worker welfare. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhishek. So I request Neha to particularly tell us her thoughts on the last point that Abhishek has mentioned.
Yeah.
Over to
Thank you.
Neha.
Yeah, thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Desai and all other colleagues, Palashka. I'm sorry, I had a very iffy day, so I wasn't sure until the very last moment that I'll be able to join this discussion. So what I heard, I entered a little bit late into the discussion, and I also looked at the paper. Just to give a little background, so when it comes to ESG and BRSR, I was involved in drafting these guidelines from the word get-go. So there is some understanding of some successes and the pitfalls of the standard, and then the role of standards themselves, right? When it comes to worker welfare. And second is something that I would like to broaden where Abhishek left off. If, going back to the first principle that we have entered into an era which is transitioning fast, right? It is transitioning so fast that almost everybody's catching up with the change that is happening, which has one very important element, that now there is no transition, which is the green has become a prefix. I mean, we cannot imagine the transition to be any other version than green and resilient and inclusive. I think that has become the central point of how we should be looking at this transition. Then when it comes to workers or welfare of workers, before getting into that, I would simply say that this transition will not be possible without the skills that enable this transition. One, okay. So first of all, you don't have the skill set to understand what is happening in terms of various features of transition, whether that's climate, that's sustainability. The things are happening extremely fast. Even institutions do not have that skill set. And if I can just say that today, people with some sort of ESG experience are getting churned in and out of organizations, and they're also getting hired. So everybody wants somebody who can say something about ESG. Okay, so that skill set, of course, is still in short supply. The second important aspect is the impact of transition, right? So people who can enable this transition a little bit better within businesses, and the businesses which will change so drastically, what will be the impact on the people that they employ, right? So it is that sort of framing that if I could use. So when it is on the impact, usually the question of workers comes not as part of green, but as just, right? You talk about just transition, then you start talking about workers, while it should not be a separate conversation. Then there is even much more problem with the way just transition is framed or understood. It is mostly understood in relation to decommissioning of coal and stops. That, these will be the regions, these will be the companies, we already employ so many, and there will be, some kind of a path which will probably accelerate in a couple of years to come, which will mean that for the lack of investment in coal, you will have to do something about these coal plants, coal mines, coal industry. And so that's where the worker issue comes in when we formulate. I would say that it is a very narrow perspective, and what we are entering now is a disruption in almost every sector simultaneously. Dislocation, not enough skill substitution or upgradation, and no relocation, right? So we're already, so it is a wicked problem to solve and to be solved urgently. And I have to also say that if you put the layer of COVID-19 and the dip in labor force participation and the dip in, especially women who have gone out of the labor force, it is extremely difficult for women to get back into the labor force. I mean, that we know by evidence and by data. So I would say that the recommendation, if we can sort of broad base it a little bit in terms of just the skill that will enable this transition better and the impact that will need to be controlled and managed. Because if you're not able to look at workers getting better off, then I think everything will be inherently fragile. And then just last comment on how we can measure this or what can we talk about. I think BRSR is a very good starting point, extremely good starting point. It is at least gives you some kind of quantitative measures and indicators and divides it into core and leadership, where even SMEs can look into that aspect. And that's why also it gets, because it is mandatory, it gets corporates accountable. So there is a sense of accountability. I will stop here just to say, give you an example of, even when we talk about MSME, the transition, say steel, that's the hot topic, right? I mean, green is one thing, but say steel and agriculture, let's just take two. We need more of both. And we do not know how we will do this when it comes to either decarbonization or resilience of our economy at the local level.
Thank you, Neha. So let's first hear from Akriti. Then I will give the floor back to Sanchita. Akriti, would you like to come in now?
Hello, everyone. I am sorry I joined a bit late, so missed some of the context, although I did go through the mail, the background paper, and about the findings from the previous study and the study that is proposed. I want to just mention about one of the biggest studies that me and my organization, Paigam, have just conducted. We are about to finalize the report. It's with University of Pennsylvania on gig workers in India. And the sample size is about 12,000 with about 6,000 cab drivers from Ola, Uber, cab aggregator kind of industry, and 6,000 is the food delivery, so Swiggy, Zomato kind of. And the third part of the report is going to be on the service industry as well, like urban company and all. Even women and gig force is something that will be part of the next round of qualitative studies. So very revealing data has actually come out with most of the drivers, most of the respondents reporting over 14 hours of work shift, traditional work shift, 14 to 16 hours being the maximum, and many other issues such as mental and physical health implications, not even being able to take one day in a week for an off. So many of such findings are there. The report is going to be out soon. So this study which is being proposed, the second one on the linkages between investment decisions and workers' welfare, the methodology, and the even the implementation and execution, we can actually discuss that how even if possible we can contribute in some of these processes as well, because the experience from this study has been very, very useful. And I heard about some of the things that were being said, and I completely agree about the database and the board, that too in a much more decentralized form. So I think the first thing that will be very key in this entire attempt would be mapping and tracking of what are the current standards across industries. So for that, a strong, solid on-ground research is going to be very, very useful, where we will see that there are industry-wise differences, and even the solutions and recommendations have to be customized in that respect. So this is just like a very broad, proposition that I'm posing, that, we can perhaps sit together with the research team, both in terms of conceptualization, if at whatever stage it is, then on ground data collection and also analysis, because we've got some very good data analysts and scientists, both quantitative and qualitative. So I think in that regard, I just wanted to flag that we have the capacity, team, and expertise to be able to help in any way for this particular study. Another component that I have been very active, my PhD is also now done, which is on insecure workforce and the role of, not just the state, but also the employers, especially in also new spaces where contractualization and all is actually happening. So the absence of a direct linkage between employer and employee. So the whole idea about accountability, where do we pose it? Should we demand these things from the state or the employer or the contractor? And, how do we kind of legally have that framework and regulatory kind of a, regime, which is not so regulatory also that it disrupts businesses, but also facilitative in its own way. So another component is also media advocacy work that we do. So if the idea is also about awareness, dissemination, then we have a production house as well, where we do small videos and other kind of, so whatever research for more of an academic, policy, and intellectual audience, we also try to simplify that through smaller videos in vernacular language to make it available to a wider public, in case we are also looking at developing a discourse around things like this. So the whole ESG model is very interesting, and would love to engage more on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Akriti. On the second study that we are going to do, I think it will be good to have a separate meeting with you and your team, your colleagues, to go through the methodology part in particular, and
sure, sir,
how we can take it forward together. I see that Abhishek has raised his hand. Abhishek,
Sir, very quick points. So very quick points with regard to the data point. There is a lot of interesting data that is being collected, and in the final form that we see, we really see the methodology through which it is collected. And I think that if you peel that layer off and see how it is collected, we already have a very interesting data to work with. I'll just give you one example. CSO collects data on annual survey of industries. Now, these are very big booklets that are published, but if you actually see in which the form in which the data is captured, it will give you productivity and worker ratio, and then also maybe able to think about where the welfare should be focused most. There are different columns. So I think one important exercise that also needs to be done is, what are the templates in which we are collecting the data, not the final form in which the publication is made. and that will give you a lot of insight about the portal architecture and where the data is not speaking to each other and things like that.
Thank you. Let me now request Sanchita to respond. Sorry, Mr. Desai has raised his hand. Yes, Mr. Desai. Mr. Desai, yeah. You have to unmute yourself, sir.
I was quite look forward to the report on the gig economy, which Neha talked about. And I wanted to mention one thing in the context of labor, that if you look at the gig economies like the taxi systems or the food distribution systems, what is not very clear is the exact nature of the relationship between the owners of that platform, whether it is Zomato or this thing, or whether it is Uber or Ola, and the people who are participants in that platform. In many ways, you're treating those people as if they're independent. So I'd say that this is something which requires, because the gig economy of that sort is going to spread quite widely. So I would say this is an area which can be of special importance amongst the four sectors that you have, about the nature of the relationship between the portal owners and the users of the portal when it comes to this. You also have to look at things like ONDC, the alternative commercial portals that is being provided now by government. But I just wanted to flag the importance of this issue from the perspective of the future. If I may just say one more thing, the other area which is very different from the others is construction. There's a heavy dependence on indirect contractual labor there. You go to any construction company, the construction company itself does not employ the workers. It has a contract with some intermediary who employs the workers. So that you cannot tell the construction company you're not looking after workers, because if you don't have workers, you only have outsourced the work. And you do not have sufficient control on the intermediaries who provide the labor for construction. So I think these two sectors require rather special treatment, rather different from the type of things that would apply to factory-based activities like the textile industry, for instance. So I just wanted to flag that. Let me stop there.
Thank you, sir. Sanchita, would you like to respond to some of these points? I know that
there is another raised hand.
So could I quickly respond to that question on gig economy by Professor Desai? Right. So it's absolutely true that the relationship is deliberately, very, very deliberately kept very opaque, and also misclassification. The issue of misclassification is very prominent in this field, where the companies deliberately call themselves tech aggregators and not employers in any way, and call the workers as driver partners, delivery partners, but there's absolutely no equation of partnership of any sort. So yes, it's like a mini entrepreneurship model as it appears, but all the things that you look at across all parameters show that the workers do not have any agency. For example, some of the things that we'd asked is whether it gives you a sense of freedom. So those things have also changed in the industry. For example, they've started getting calls to report at work if there's a high demand zone and they're not. So it's not really at will that they can join. I mean, so that kind of a thing. Also data ownership. So in case of accidents or violence at work or customer misbehavior or some kind of a issue that happens, there have also been cases where the entire database has been found to be deleted of the worker wherever there's an accident or something. So this is again a practice which we found has been widely reported. So the data transparency question is also a very important one. Also the recruitment processes through which these workers come on board and start working with a Zomato or a Swiggy, they have these intermediaries and informal agencies for hiring and recruitment that have come in, so that again, that on paper also there's no accountability that how was it. So there are many such practices in which these there's misclassification. But so all the you know all the formal job benefits of that employment do not accrue to these workers, but when it comes to wearing a uniform, following rules, having all the papers, those of the the responsibilities of a formal job are actually shouldered on the workers, but no product or benefit of a formal job does not accrue to them. So yes, there are many such issues that came in.
So
Thank
let's hear from Sanchita. Sanchita briefly, then after that I will request Palaska to make her brief presentation.
Okay, thank you so much everybody for your comments, inputs, insights, views, and also sharing some information which would be very useful for us. I think we've got a lot of comments. I don't think I can address all of them, but first let me say, once you read the report, some of the points that have been made will be addressed. So first of all, Mr. Desai, the first point, difference between sectors. Yes. So the presentation was supposed to be made within 10 minutes, so we didn't talk about the sectors. But if you look at different sectors, they treat contractual workers differently. And, even the skill levels of contractual workers are different in different sectors. And also, responding to Mr. Upadhyay's comment about, workers, though we got inputs on all kinds of workers, we specifically looked at welfare of workers who are on contract, and mostly unskilled or semi-skilled. And also, what is defined as semi-skilled in one industry is not the same as in a different industry. So for construction, what is semi-skilled is not the same as in textiles, for example. And within the sectors also, there is a lot of difference. So gig economy, and then, referring to some of Akriti's points, if you talk to, say, taxi aggregators, they have very different points, different practices than, say, food aggregators. Yeah. So, and if you talk to them, they will say very good things about the kind of schemes they have taken for their employees, particularly, women employees, or, how they are trying to raise the skill levels of the employees. I'm talking about gig economy specifically. So this is the picture we get when we talk to the employers, and our report highlights a lot of these things. Sector wise, we have raised, we have written about these things. I'm thinking in terms of data collection and, the template of data collection and all, Abhishek's point. Okay, this is something where we will benefit by, talking to people who have been doing this for quite some time, so we understand these points more and see how we can integrate this going forward in our studies. And the point about, government doing so much, when we look at the findings, we see that companies, if you leave to companies, we are not sure how much they are going to do. So what the role of the government would be, we can discuss that further. But, government has to have certain kind of role in ensuring that the employers follow at least the minimum norms. Even when they provide benefits to contractual workers, they do it because the law mandates it. If they can escape, they don't. So, for example, when they hire through third-party contractors, most of the companies, they don't care whether the workers who come through these third-party contractors get any benefits or not. Some of them have said that they audit these third-party contractors, but those tend to be bigger companies. They, they have CSR, and they consider this as part of their CSR as well. So, there is we don't have, our sample size is not that big, but the kind of inputs we've got is really wide. And so, what we did was to just present a summary, and hopefully when we will circulate our report, you will get answers to some of the questions you raised.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Now, broadly speaking, this is what is coming to my mind. See, some of these comments or suggestions, maybe you can have another round of look at the report, make some final changes, final round of revision, since it is yet to be published. So that possibly can be done by you, along with support from Palashka and Ritika. The other is that still there will be a set of issues which will remain unaddressed. You may, towards the end of the report, you may have a section highlighting issues for further research or further discussion. Maybe we can put them in a tabular form, first issues and then how they can be approached for further research. Because today we have not just discussed issues, but also thanks to our experts, we have a fairly good idea of how to address those issues. So that, I think, will add value to this report. Now, we have about 50 minutes to close this meeting. May I request Palashka for her presentation? Palashka, very briefly in about 10 minutes.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Sir. I'll just share my screen.
I can't hear you properly.
I'll just share my screen. Am I audible?
Little bit better, but I think it would be good if you can speak a bit more loudly.
Yeah, yeah. My screen visible?
Yes.
So I'll start with the background. So there has been a significant shift in investment landscape in India as investors are increasingly considering ESG factors in making their investment decisions. And workers' welfare encompasses a range of factors such as labor practices, diversity and inclusion, and they reflect a corporate ability to foster positive social change, contribute to societal well-being, and align with broader sustainable development goals. Also, there have been numerous studies that have demonstrated that corporate.
Ask a little bit more. You have to raise your volume.
Yeah,
I can't hear you properly.
So 1 second, I'll just change my mic. Hello, am I audible, sir?
It's better now.
Yeah. So there have been numerous studies that have demonstrated that corporate tend to exhibit enhanced operational efficiency, and they also attract and retain talented employees. It fosters a better relationship with customers, suppliers, and local communities, and they also help in forming a better human capital. So a few tools that investors ESG making ESG decisions are: first one is ESG rating. The ESG ratings are specialized ESG. They are specialized ESG rating agencies that access corporates by assigning scores that help investors compare and benchmark them. The second is ESG integration. Investors are using proprietary framework that incorporate workers' welfare into the investment analysis. And the third is stakeholder engagement. Engagement last one is regulatory environment. Government and regulatory bodies such as Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which supervises corporates incorporated under the Companies Act, and SEBI, which supervises publicly listed companies as well as asset managers. So now the objective that we stated here is to understand the relevance and effectiveness of ESG tools in making investment decisions for fostering workers' welfare in India. The hypothesis that we come out, the question that we come out with is, are ESG tools an effective determinant for making investment decisions in India? And the proposed methodology that we have written here is, first is that identifying good practices based on the review of relevant literature. Second is literature review of a representative sectoral set of Indian corporates, investment banks, and venture capital firms will be identified for interviews. Qualitative and quantitative questions will be asked to prepare a cross-sectional database to test casual impact of ESG tools in making investment decisions. And appropriate control variables will be used to understand the importance of workers' welfare in making such investment decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Palaska, though the audio was still not that good. Anyway, I hope that you have been able to at least read the presentation, if not here. So once again, I would request our experts for their thoughts on the importance of this work or not. Secondly, how should we go about it? I mean, this is a draft methodology that we have presented. Do you think is it enough, or do you think that we need to do some more thinking and revise this methodology to come out with something more specific? And this more specific is to see while making investment decisions whether our institutional investors, investment bank and others, whether they are taking into account workers' welfare as an important factor behind making investment decisions. If they are, then what is the impact at the corporate level? If they are not, then why are not they taking workers' welfare as an important factor in their decision making? Once again, I would first request Mr. Desai for his thoughts.
There's two things I would like to say is that if you're going to ask any management, whether it's an investment bank or a company, about how they take workers' welfare into account, you're not going to get honest answers. So what I would suggest is that don't just ask them, do you take it into account? Please also ask them, how do you take it into account? Particularly the investment bank, that they have criteria, they have the parameters which are supposed to use for the E, the S, and the A, and the G. So I'd say that you should please add questions about, if they say yes, you do take it into account, then ask them further how. What is the parameter that you take into account when you make this ranking in terms of ESGs and so on? So that is one thing that is, and equally, if it is feasible, and if you're talking to people at the company end, not at the investor end, then see whether it is possible to talk to workers there. But that may be more difficult because of the scale at which this would be required. But I would certainly say we should focus as much on how rather than do you do it into account.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Vijayji, on this second point of Mr. Desai, that it may not be possible for a worker to tell us that when investments are coming to his factory or the company where he is working, or he or she, but it may be possible for trade union leaders to tell us that how this particular issue, and not just whether, but how this particular issue is being taken at the company's level or at the bank's level. Do you see that there is scope for advocacy with investment bankers to make it more effective for furthering the cause of workers' welfare in our country? Vijay.
Yes, I think ecosystem needs to be addressed. When we talk investment, so the entire ecosystem pertaining to that particular industry needs to be taken into account. So rightly people are observing that stakeholders engagement. So many of the stakeholders are coming from this ecosystem, making investment smooth and beneficial in return. So the welfare of the worker as well as the welfare of the entire society needs to be taken care. So making this sure, 2-3 points I would like to refer here. One is, as long as workers are concerned, their knowledge about the economic decision, engagement in the decision making, it is not into consideration. They are never be. So most of them, they are not aware about what such initiative or such decisions are being taken. So making it good, it would be good to take workers and other stakeholders into confidence to make it sure. So workers, not only workers, the surrounding of the industry. Suppose one is proposing in one particular industry, so what is there in surrounding? One. The second is, when I'm talking the ecosystem. Ecosystem is a big chain. Supply chain workers, outsource workers, growers, producers, means it's a huge chain. And most of the time we find when investment is coming or any other promotional policies are coming from the government, so this system is not getting benefited with this. Either because of the lack of information, lack of knowledge, one, they are not directly getting access to get the benefit of that one, directly or indirectly. So here I would say a narrative to take them into consideration, take them into confidence, that's most required. Before going for practical decisions, a setting of narratives behind that is must. Until unless it is set, it is toned properly, the decision, the action, it doesn't go down properly. So the second initiative is the setting the narrative, setting the tone, involving the stakeholders in the surrounding, whatever they are. And the third and very most, as we are discussing, while we are preparing the questionnaire, it depends what we want to get answered. If we are really have gone into all such details of the issue, and if really we are bringing the question, because we are going to get answer of the question we are posing. So it's our intelligence by designing, while designing the questionnaire, how far we are concerned with this. Concerned, I mean, how far we are going into detail of understanding the ecosystem, knowing all such aspects, knowing the workers, especially what I talked in the previous session, they are not organized. You taught me trade union, but most of the worker in the informal sector, if I am correct to observe, hardly there is union. So you can't have a collective voice from them. You can't have a representative of them to speak on behalf of them. So it is we people to find the means how to reach them, to know them. They are representative less mostly, and especially workers in supply chain, especially workers in gig and platform. Very minimal presence is there. So trade union is totally because, and so it's our duty, the audience we are looking for. First, we need to understand their design, their this one, and accordingly we need to design the questionnaire to ask. And if our questions are to that one, we can get the answer what we expect from them. Otherwise, suo moto being representative, so we know this is not there. So ecosystem is must. I always request to see the ecosystem. Employable, lifelong employability, it is becoming a big question. We are referring CSR and their responsibility, what you would refer to all their ethical. So skilling, upskilling, reskilling, it is becoming a big task. Industries are not taking their concern. So can this investment, can this CSR project be part of this? Can they cater or tackle this issue? So all such means workers' welfare, we have to list out in a totality what welfare actually means. Because of the push of the technology, a particular skill is getting lost within 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So making one employable lifelong, a different approach needs. So all such also coming in on the way for workers. कि साहब छोड़ो मेरी उसका पेंशन और उसकी बात तो छोड़ो. If I'm not getting upskilled, I may not have a job there. So immediate concerns are very different for workers. So that also need to be addressed.
Thank you, Brijesh. So what I propose to do is that we are going to draft a questionnaire, say a set of questions. Then we are going to consult each one of you and a few more for finalizing the question. I think we need to spend more time in drafting the questions, the right questions, and in identifying the right people.
Correct.
To interview, to approach to interview. And for that, in this particular case, I think we need to consult Mr. Particular. I think among us, he is in the best position to guide us about investment bankers and venture capitalists whom we should approach. I mean, those companies we should approach. So let me now request Abhishek, Neha, and Akriti for your thoughts on this matter.
Thank you, sir. One quick point here. Since the proposal was mostly with regards to ESG, and also linking it to the question of how, I think there is a need to harmonize ESG standards and rating and reporting systems. And that will also hold firms to higher standards of accountability. So part of the question of how could potentially be answered in harmonizing the reporting and ratings of ESGs. That's all.
Thank you, Abhishek. Yeah, this is an important point. Though I would say harmonization with a little bit of flexibility. Everything can't be harmonized because sectors are so different and the requirements of various clients in each of those sectors are different. So harmonization, yes, but with some so-called what we call special and differential treatment with some flexibility. Yeah. So
I would echo what you just said, Bipul, because harmonization is probably also not desirable in certain sense, in certain cases. So it's sometimes things get very sector specific, subsector specific, and things like that. But how I have seen regulators approach it, and where there is work happening on these things, is how they address it through the concept of interoperability rather than harmonization. So you can also take a cue from how SEBI has designed BRSR. It also says that if you are reporting on some of these things according to international standards, please mention that. So it can become much more explicit, mappable. And when I used to work on this, we had actually done something like this, which corporate sector found very useful. You know, if some of them were reporting on BRR earlier version, and they had just and GRI, for example. GRI is much more detailed, which is an international standard, but it's a voluntary standard. And so it was good to tell the corporates just a simple mapping exercise that this is where you are and this is what you're doing. This is what is required of your national compliance, at least, and this is where you are on the international standards of compliance. I would come back to in terms of measurement. I would still suggest us that we take BRSR as the starting point. It includes a lot of other international standards and best practices, and a lot of thought has gone into it. You will also find pretty detailed questions, which as a general process that a company needs to undertake, or as the indicator of process which the company has put into place to take care of some of these things. Things like, how many complaints have you resolved? Worker complaints have you resolved? And these are important questions, right? And they're all welfare related. So in terms of your wages, so what is your leadership? So there is a lot of, I think there are more than 140 data points only on some of these questions, And why I'm saying that we can begin with that is because it is a domestically mandated thing, even though for listed companies, SEBI is also trying to do something for SMEs, which is what they're calling the light version. And there are many organizations which are tracking the performance of corporates based on these indicators. Now, what I also have to say is that the quality of data which companies fill is neither, it's still erratic. So a lot of cleaning of this data needs to happen. And even that effort is going on. And some institutions are looking at reading the reports, looking at what has come into it, hygiene, doing the hygiene check for data, and then present it in certain consumable manner for what the trends are. So a lot of effort is happening, Bipul, in this space. So it will, my suggestion would be to pick that, what already exists, and then see whether that actually makes a difference. How your question was, what can we ask investors why they are not doing it? I think it's not that there is some conscious investors, if I could put the term. I don't like to value load everything. You simply have to do certain things to do it right? They are trying to look at these things. But for an investment proposition, how much of this becomes a data point within their calculus is still unclear, because finally they would look at a project on other parameters, unless they are very, very particular about this parameter that goes into their investment decision making. But definitely, if that push comes from investors, corporates also try to align themselves. So there is a lender, borrower, investor, borrower kind of a relationship that goes on, which I think is an important one to look into. Based on the standards that we have, I think that should be the starting point. But like World Benchmark Alliance has done a lot of work on workers. You will see a lot of, IFC standards are also there. There are certain other standards, like even for infrastructure, there are standards. So there is stuff that you can look into, which is already in existence.
Thank you, Neha. So I think the sense which I'm getting after hearing you is that already there is substantial literature on this matter, particularly the starting point. Our starting point should be clearly defined. Only then we can make further moves, right? And so in this work, I think literature review is going to be very, very critical. And based on literature review, my point is that let us not come out with any questionnaire based on our wishful thinking or whatever way you would put it. Let us first do a good literature review and then prepare draft a questionnaire, then consult all experts like you to finalize it, and then go to the field rather than hurrying it up. So that's how.
And I would imagine, you have to define what does going to the field mean, right?
Yes. Yes, and the reason why I'm also saying this, we may not have to do a large sample survey in this case. Yeah. Even a small sample survey, small but effective sampling of such investors, and then going and meeting them, talking to them with time, not just giving them a questionnaire and asking them to fill it up. That won't work. So
And
this
these-
is
yeah.
more intensive work.
Yeah. So in these, thinking aloud, Vipul, and this is my last point. When you do the literature survey, literature review, very quickly things will start appearing in front of your eyes. It's very quick because there is a lot which has already happened. If you can also even look at published reports of some of these big fours, which have actually looked at the quality of disclosure that the Indian corporates, it's listed companies, but what they're doing. Okay. So there is enough and more to go through. The second is where you will find, and I can already say where you will find loopholes. You will find loopholes on supply chain disclosures, right? So already you know that there is a gap, and this is what we would really want to address. Then the constituency of investors which are looking at these things also can be sort of segmented. You can go to impact investors first, and there are associations which look into it. They are more sort of oriented towards these things like SDGs, right? So SDG investors and these guys. So there is you can start filtering it pretty quickly if I were to say something like that. Now, an LIC will not probably tell you anything, right? So it's very difficult to. However, they have become more conscious. By the way, they had a stewardship code. The Pension Fund of India, PFRDA had done that. And I'm talking about a decade ago, and nothing happened. It is a stewardship code. But in the last 3 or 4 years, LIC has become much more looking at, okay, what can we do on green, right? But then you add this question, what can you do on green plus?
Right. Thank you. So we're going to take all this into account. And the larger point is we have to be very clear on what we want to get out of it. Yeah. It should not be another Me Too exercise. Here Me Too is in another sense, of course. So I would request Mr. Desai tell us. It would be great to hear him that whether we are on right track or not. That's the most important thing. Sir, you are muted.
In many ways, the ESG area is being explored a lot because the reality is that the ESG ratings, the ESG ratings have been very personalized, individualized. If I were to look at it, even in areas other than workers' welfare, in areas of environment, social dimension, and governance, there are explorations. I also see a general tendency now to separate the environment side. And in many ways, people argue that the way what we need to see in terms of environmental impact is so broad now, it's so wide-ranging, that don't mix it up with, say, governance, whether you have a corporate governance system which is good enough, etc., etc. So there is a growing desire amongst people who want to do this type of evaluation to separate out the E from the S and from the G. And S is very broad. It's very difficult to actually get an agreed set of parameters for S. Even forget across the world, even within India, the parameters that I would look at if I'm in Kerala and the parameters that I would look at if I'm in UP are very different. So I'd say that there are many challenges which are coming up. So I don't know how well how much effort we should put into integrating workers' welfare into ESG. What I would suggest is that we do start defining measures of workers' welfare in some ways so that at some point there will be some integration. But I'm not sure that right now working with people who are working on ESG will get us very far. Because there's a great deal of discussion going on redesigning ESG to separate out the environmental side. I don't know whether Neha agrees with this or not, but I'll leave it to her.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Neha.
Mr. Desai, it is in a way the slicing of these things is a very technocratic and a lazy response to the reality, right? And we had begun with saying that you cannot slice it too hard, because it is important. I mean, an environmentally sustainable project which displaces people does not make sense. Yeah. So if you simply just look at that angle, but you're right that there is a slicing approach which has come simply because people think that social is extremely difficult to capture, and there isn't. So this debate is ongoing. We have tried to say that environment and social need to be looked together. It can make things a little bit more complex, but it is the way to go. But at the same time, I would say that beginning with what exists will give you a sense of where you want to go. And I like the idea that Mr. Desai just said, that think from because you've done so much sort of work on these kind of things, that think of what welfare actually would mean. Yeah. And then see if the current standards that you have adequately capture that or not. That's also a very good way to look at it.
Thank you, Neha. I think this exchange of ideas, I think this is what is required. You've got some very good inputs and ideas before jumping into it. Abhishek, you want to add anything?
Sir, I just want to add one thing, that reporting and all of those things don't really necessarily lead to outcomes. So that's a big question. And I'm just small example, I'll take 20 seconds to explain it. I'm doing an exercise for Government of Rajasthan to understand how much of investment is getting into SDG. And so for that, I opened up the state indicator framework, which actually is a modification of the global framework, then the national framework, then one introduced by Niti Aayog. And so I'm dealing with 330 indicators. So what I'm talking about is, and none of those indicators, they are outcome oriented, but we don't know whether the outcome is happening or not. I mean, that's a question that is up for the debate, but one is reporting, the other is and that is why I said that harmonization, I agree, it needs to be differentiated with some common principles, but it does align everyone towards at least some action. So I'll leave it at that.
Maybe this is just as a thought, maybe loud thing. Instead of going into too many places, what I'm thinking is that why don't we just pick up 2 or 3, maybe 4 companies and test out all this. But this is just a question which is coming to my mind, that whether they'll be willing to reveal what we want to do. So we have to be very careful about the methods which we are going to apply to get as much information as possible. Let's say there are and different types of companies from different sectors at different levels. Let's say the ABG Group, Aditya Birla Group, let's say, just as an example. Let's say there one particular line of their operations. It's a huge group. We can't go everywhere. And then see how they are dealing with that particular line of operation, that particular business is dealing with these issues. So one is good literature review to understand. I think that is what is perhaps is missing in our discourse, that we do not know what exactly it is, and also its challenges, what it can lead. Is it going to attract more investment? It is going to enhance workers' welfare? These are some questions. So one is that literature, where according to all of you, there is already enough literature in place. There is also contradiction in literature. We have to capture all of them. And second is to do rigorous, really rigorous case studies of few companies, of few lines of few companies. I'm just loudly thinking. So,
And sir, also bring, and I think it's important to bring labor union voices to see the perceptions on the other side, because that will only have one side of the story. Yeah.
I mean, access to those companies and to that data would be a challenge unless some of these companies are your friends. I mean, so you will have to say why you're doing this, what will be it used for, what is this case study, where will it go? Because actually, when I did this exercise, and I did this was at least we made a compendium of some of these things way back. And everything had to be sanitized, anonymized to be able to be brought out as even in a compendium. So even when they were putting a case study out, which was a good case study, you know, not the study about challenges, but the study about successes. And a lot of it, you know, Oxfam used to do it on a regular basis. They would look at the public disclosures through BRR, and there are others. And they would do something they called fair finance or some things like that. And they some stark revelations. Even some of the better companies that we know of today don't do things on the contract labor that much that I would expect them to. They don't.
Yes.
The whole migrant labor movement is a reflection of exactly that, right? Our corporates are not taking responsibility. Supply chains.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Yeah, this is just an anecdotal example. Few months back, I was in Delhi. I went to Delhi for some other meeting. Somebody called me. So they covered my travel. So I flew from Jaipur to Delhi, and then they also sent a taxi from Taj Mansingh. It's a Tata Group company. And I was, as my nature is, I was talking to the driver. I got to know that driver is getting just 10,000 rupees a month. That's all. Nothing else.
And he'll be fired without any protection, without any compensation. He will be the one who will be walking back in another pandemic, right?
Yeah. And a little bit of overtime, of course. That overtime part is there. Right? Taj Mansingh, a Tata Group. Right? So, I don't know how much we can unravel this.
No.
But let us see. Let us see. Mr. Desai, would you like to?
No, I just wanted to mention, we have not discussed one thing, which is the degree of inequality of incomes within a company. But that information, in one sense, is available in the annual reports of the company.
Yes.
Every company has to report, for instance, the ratio of its top management to the median income of its employees. Not the lowest, but the average, that is the median income. If you see these, you will see that these days, the chief executives have salaries. There's one which I saw the other day, where the chief executive salary was 670 times the median income of other employees. But you will get that information. Every company is required to report it, and every company's report is in public domain. So if you want to explore this area of how the returns of a company are distributed, which is not part of what you have been talking about so far, then this is one thing that you can look at. But let me just leave the the question. See, in many ways, what we are trying to do is to find better expression for the welfare of workers. That is what we are trying to do. So let's focus on that. That's because that is, we have, the reality is that I think all of us are probably convinced that there is not enough consideration of any measure of workers' welfare, not just by corporations, but also by government. No? So in some ways, I appreciate what you're trying to do, because it is necessary to make this part of the public discourse. And I hope that if we come up with measurable parameters and answers, and the sectors that you picked up are the sectors which are in need of closer examination. Because they are the ones where the informality of the employment generation is, with a possible exception of textile, with the other three, are the areas where the informality of employment generation and almost total absence of statutory controls is what is really the problem. So let me just leave it at that. I don't think we should try and overdo the
Yes, we have to also, we shouldn't overdo things. We have to also keep in mind, I won't say constraints, but be very focused on what is our
what
objective.
we are trying to do. Yes.
Bipul, just one last point. I just want to, if this will help you. Last year at the Chief Minister's Advisory Council, we did a report on managing urban informality, and the whole thought process of workers' welfare is basically evolved out of 8-9 months of consultation. I'll be happy to share that report, but it's also available on the Department of Planning website.
If you can email that to us,
yes,
that will be great. But the larger point I wanted to make, and that will be my last point, is that I don't know whether somebody has looked into it or not. Forget about business. We don't expect that, at least at the moment. Even government is not talking about workers' welfare. Even Samaj is not talking about workers' welfare. It has gone out of the discourse. It's not even in the back burner. It is out of the burner. चूल्हे के पीछे चला
Everybody is only talking about, everybody is only talking about climate. Everything has been pushed. Everything else has been pushed, including the broader environment.
So the larger point, and that is helping your business there. So you should treat us. So the larger point is what Mr. Desai has just flagged. How we can get this back into this discourse of welfare.
I couldn't agree more. It is that we are not looking at it from the people's point of view. That has gone out of the discourse. Now it is decarbonization alone.
Yeah. See, usually I read 8 to 10 newspapers a day. I am unable to recall the good article. When I last read a good article from a trade unionist or some other expert on this. So somehow this is, I think, I don't know why it has happened. Maybe it's a Datta Samant effect. I don't know. That people are so angry. I know some people of C2 in my previous state. I call it previous state, nothing else. People are so angry with them, they keep changing their residence. Otherwise, abhi tak ho jata. Right. So, any other point that you may like to flag? Otherwise, I think it was a very, very rich discussion. We are going to, I will request Palashka and Nitika to capture this. It's not just about writing a report of the PSC meeting and submitting it to Ford Foundation. Well, that is required, important. I'm not diluting its importance. But let us first capture this. So tomorrow and day after, over the weekend, you think about it, mull over it, without referring to any recording, anything. And then capture it. And see, let us see how we can take forward this discourse. First, we have to get the issue into the discourse, of the larger discourse of Viksit Bharat, and then how to take it. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Desai. Abhishek,
Thank you.
Neha.
Thank you.